Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. I'm Tony Groves and today I'm 1/3 of what may be our longest pod to date. Remember folks, it's meant to be fun and occasionally informative. The Echo Chamber podcast is a free-flowing conversation that may occasionally touch on mature subjects. This is my co-host,
Martin McMahon.
We're not even going to go into any of the usual Martin is a lunatic stuff, and we're just going to skip and tell you folks that we're delighted to be joined by perhaps Twitter's most tenacious person and definitely the most tireless one, Izzy Kamikaze. Izzy, in case you have been hiding under a rock, was the first female social justice warrior ever and is said to have been the person who inspired Countess Markovic. It's time. It is time that you're here today, Izzy, because this is on this day in 1914 the first bra was patented, and then the day after, I believe you went to the first bra burning ceremony.
That's it.
Thanks very much for joining us.
You just took my punchline. Yeah, great to be here.
Hi Izzy, thanks for coming along the show, and
Nice to see you again, man.
yeah, it is nice to see you again, Izzy. And as Tony didn't say,
we haven't met since our water warrior days.
Yeah, back in when Rita and everybody was there back in the old days. I'm going to kick in straight away, Izzy, and talk about another activist that we both knew online and met offline, and that's Dara Quigley.
Yeah.
So would you like to tell us a little where we are at with Dara? Anybody who knows that Dara died 6 months and 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I was going to say that in terms of recent activity on Twitter, because I'm trying to keep with your Twitter focus here, 6 months has elapsed since Dara's death, and on that half anniversary, whatever you want to call it, people shared some memories, and it was good to see her. It was good to see her being recalled. My background pick, which is something I would normally change reasonably often, but since Dara died, my background pick on my Twitter profile has been a beautiful picture by Mick Call. Is not by Mick Call? Oh, it's by you, Martin.
Yeah,
it's such a wonderful picture. I thought I'm giving Mick Call the credit. Sorry about that, Mick. I'll have to give you credit for something else some other time. But really, really lovely picture of.
It captures Dara, and I didn't like that.
And I'm keeping it. I'm keeping that until we see some semblance of.
I
justice
sent
for
it
Dara.
to journalists, and I sent it to her family, and anybody who knew her. Because that's the way to remember Dara.
Yeah.
That's where she was in her element.
Well, I think Dara Quigley's death is, well, for a start off, it's one of a massive series of Garda scandals. I use your hashtag all the time, Gardageddon. I think I've overtaken you in using it, actually. I think if somebody did the stats on that, I'd be way ahead of you. But, we've had, is it 14 inquiries into the Gardaí over the last number of years without any significant action. And I think what happened to Dara is just the most horrific.
Do we have any update on where the Garda investigation is into that? Just for folks who don't know.
My understanding, the coroner's court is the first kind of stage of things. Do you know what I mean? So
okay, just for folks who don't know, there was a video of Dara on a security camera, and it was shared by somebody who actually recorded it off closed circuit TVs, and then it was shared widely on media.
Yes, it was basically shared by a serving member of the Gardaí in a private WhatsApp group. My understanding is that the other members of that group were also Gardaí, and somebody leaked it outside of that group, which is the only reason we even know that this happened. As far as I'm concerned, the fact that it was even shared privately for laughs
I know
is a horrific abuse, never mind it going public. But a person who was under a lot of emotional stress at that time, as she clearly was, a person who was in distress, walking naked in the street, how could you be more vulnerable?
And people who don't know Dara was
abused in that way.
She was a very slight girl. It's not that she was a big, huge person. There was your instinct would have been to put your coat around her.
To protect her. And these are the people who are paid to protect us. And I do think it's one of there's all kinds of symbolic levels of it, because the reporting I thought was a problem also, because all of the papers reported, like, their headline was naked woman. They always got like naked woman in there somewhere. Now, I mean, she was naked and she was a woman and she was very vulnerable. She could not have been more vulnerable. But this was somebody who was a prolific writer, activist,
friend,
comrade to many people, and who was deserving of a lot more respect.
Well,
than
can I come in and just broaden that out?
Yeah.
Whatever about, and I really don't want to belittle this, but I have to say it's timely that we mention this, because this is in the same week that Ian O'Doherty was on TV3 talking about the social media and how he thinks social media will cause someone to kill themselves, and this is the same guy who has actually told people on social media that they should actually, in fact, go and kill themselves. I'm actually looking at a tweet that he sent himself, and he said that basically it's, you're an anonymous slurry pipe, a coward, and inadequate and feeble, just go kill yourself. I mean,
I don't even
you'll
comment.
be neither missed nor mourned.
I don't even comment on him. Why even bother? Don't give him oxygen.
I can't even remember anymore why I got blocked by Ian O'Doherty. It was a long, long time ago. I can assure you I wasn't abusive to him. It's an interesting thing that I've observed over my years on Twitter, that the people who campaign the loudest for some kind of censorship of social media, and who are always talking about people being abused on social media, are quite frequently people who are very abusive themselves. And what they want is their particular point of view to be the only point of view. Their definition of abuse is anybody who contests their position. In particular, there was various elected representatives of the Labour Party, obviously most prominently former Senator Lorraine Higgins, during the
Laura's laws, as we call it.
Laura's laws, during the term of the previous government, campaigning, and every time, there would be a certain amount of cant about vulnerable young people being abused and being bullied. But every time they got interviewed or they spoke about it, what they came back to was that members of the public were expressing displeasure online with their political representatives.
Exactly. Now, I've got to say, for politicians, if you haven't learned the lesson here, when you try and censor social media, you end up out of politics, because it's the one thing people won't stand for. It's our forum. You don't control it. We all have voices, so back off.
Well, a recent example that I had a small involvement in myself was hashtag Regina Cops. Regina Doherty made a complaint to Gardaí. Again, the full circumstances of this are not yet known and will come to light, but made a complaint about a tweeter who's known to a lot of us,
Sane
Politico, tweeting about matters that were on the public record relating to Regina Doherty's finances. Really, was I think the main crux of it, but also an article that was published on Jude Collins's blog. But there was this extraordinarily irregular airport stop. It was referred to as a caution, but it didn't satisfy any of the criteria for a legal caution being administered. And it was obviously a person who is trying to travel through an airport and catch a plane is under duress. It's not an appropriate way for anything to be done. But again, this is about somebody who's actually a resident of another country commenting on matters that are on the public record.
Well, I've said this before about
private information.
I've said this before about Ireland. The journalists in Ireland are very good at doing critical analysis of what's going on in other countries, but they have this huge blind spot when it comes to our own country. They're not as open. I spoke on Broadsheet last night, Broadsheet on the TV, about why they're not as open. If you get a chance, go back and have a look at it. don't mean to push it on.
No,
but
it's very challenging. I want to speak in defence of journalists for a moment, because I'm a little bit concerned about us throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and going into social media is all very well, but social media is generally speaking not fact checked, whatever. Now, sadly, you could look at the mainstream media and say it's not very fact checked. It certainly has very transparent biases. Our main problem in Ireland is an over concentration of ownership in, we have a near monopoly.
What we have is there is a monolith, and what we struggle with is because you've good journalists who are doing good work, who
Yes.
really want to do better work, but quite often they're restricted in A, the system, or B, an unconscious editorial control that exists because of a concentration of ownership. You have good journalists who are underpaid and under pressure, and and find themselves vulnerable to if certain things aren't.
It is not an easy path for anybody to do decent, kind of honest investigative journalism in Ireland. I actually would like to name check two people that I think are exemplary in this respect, and one of them is Elaine Edwards with the Irish Times, who has been working on data protection stories, and most recently the public services card story relentlessly over years, and has done us all a great service. And I think we need to recall that before we too readily smear the entire mainstream media with one brush. Sorry, one other person, Martin, is Conal O'Flaherty with the Examiner, has been chipping away at the Magdalene Laundry's mother and baby homes, institutional abuse stories for years also. And, that type of journalism where somebody works on a story for years is what we really need. I often think of Mary Raftery, who was the first person to blow the doors off the institutional abuse stories in Ireland, and who sadly died too young, and left a fund in her name, which is funding excellent investigative journalism to this day. But those people are in very short supply. Sadly, you have 10 Ian O'Dohertys for every one.
Well, this is what I would say is that, and this brings me around to another person that's very important to you, or issue that's very important to you. I divide journalists by how they approach Kathryn Corcoran. That's how I divide them. And I divide them down that line. Yes. And any of them that came out and denigrated that woman for the gargantuan work she did off her own back, any of them that came out against her, don't call yourself a journalist. Get up, walk out, give it to somebody else.
Well, I'm very glad you've mentioned Kathryn, and I'm honoured to know Kathryn. She is one of the most impressive people I've ever met. She's just been honoured by the Bar of Ireland with a Human Rights Award, a richly deserved Human Rights Award. I don't know if many people in Ireland realise the significance yet of the work that Kathryn has done. Now, she has pioneered a method. Basically, the doors were closed on this, as you know, they are on all of the institutional scandals in the past. Getting hold of the documents is practically an impossibility. Yeah, all of those institutions did keep records, but their records are completely inaccessible. And Kathryn kind of invented her own way of bypassing this by looking for death certs, which are obviously public documents. And she went in over a long period of time. She went in and got as many death certs as were possible, as it was possible to get, paying for each one, as you do.
And her only skin in the game was concern.
Well, she lived in the town, and she remembered the children at the time when the home was open, because I think quite unusually in Tuam, the home did not include its own school. The children went out of the home to the local schools, where they were marched in after the other kids to prevent them associating with them, and sat at the back of the class, and they left the class earlier than the other children. So Kathryn remembers those children being marched in and out of her class. And she has, I think, one of the lovely things about Kathryn is she talks about a memory from her own childhood, and it's not a memory that reflects well on her. On herself. And I think if we all had this kind of honesty in our own part in these scandals, because all of these massive societal things, everybody played a part in them.
It takes a part. You need to either look the other way or you need to pretend that it's.
Kathryn tells this horrible story, and she's talking about a time when she was only 5 or 6 years old herself, of having internalized so much the idea that the home babies, which was how they were referred to, were lesser human beings and they were segregated and so on. And she played a trick on a child where she handed her a stone wrapped up in a sweet wrapper.
I've heard
a child that had probably never had a sweet. And she handed the child this, and the child was delighted and then opened it and disappointed. And that moment has stayed with her through her life. And I think a lot of people would not tell that story about themselves, even talking about themselves at 5 or 6 years of age. And I think it tells you a lot about Kathryn's attitude to her work. But her method, which I wanted to mention, she was very systematic. She just went in, she kept requesting death certs until she had 796 death certs. I can't remember how much you pay for each death cert, but it was a matter of a few €1,000. She's not a wealthy woman, but over a period of time, she paid out this money. Now, this method, if any of you heard the recent Smileham Park documentary, which is the place in Scotland where a mass grave has recently been discovered.
Okay.
The BBC did a documentary around it. They spoke to Kathryn quite extensively during that programme. But basically they used the same investigative method. They requested...
So she set the template.
The death certs. So I think that this method that has been pioneered by Kathryn is going to be used all over the place and is going to be instrumental in resolving a lot of institutional.
So it's not just a debt of gratitude we owe her; it's actually a debt of gratitude that could.
It will roll into the future, and you know, Kathryn has. I've spoken myself to some of the survivors of the home, and to some of the relatives who are looking for news of their family members who may have died in the home or who may have been illegally adopted, and in many cases it's unclear which of these things happened. And Kathryn has just been such an enormous resource to those people. She's so humane, she's so confidential, she has made it her business, she has helped people to find graves where graves exist, to find living relatives where they exist. I actually think the treatment of the Tuam babies story, the story itself actually, is a good symbol of everything that is wrong with Irish society.
Well, it's still wrong with Irish society.
And Kathryn is a symbol of everything that is best in the Irish people. I want to say that. I want to say what's in this woman is also to some extent in all of us, and that's what we need to nurture, that compassionate side that can be self-critical and self-aware and take our share of blame, small as it may be, but without fighting it, and also take a greater share than we need to of the responsibility for putting it right.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just want to say the best news I've heard all year is Kathryn Corcoran being formally honoured for this work, and I hope that plenty more honour and credit comes her way, and I hope that justice comes for the children still interred in a sewage system in Tuam, and in many other locations there are inappropriate burials, mass graves, burials of people whose deaths were not recorded, deaths that were falsely recorded to facilitate illegal adoptions. This is a scandal that it's going to take decades to uncover in its entirety, but Kathryn has made a huge, huge contribution to it. I'm sorry, I told you guys you were going to have difficulty shutting me up.
I'm going to move us on in line with this national scandal and say that actually, you know, how much have things actually changed when you see a hashtag like MeToo going around the world, and we're seeing people talking about their experiences of being abused and raped, and I'm not trying to draw a false equivalence here, but I am wondering about, you know, the patriarchal society that we still actually we still endure, and that people are now only getting the courage to speak out against. I saw a wonderful lady, Hazel Kathryn Larkin, who's Hazel K Larkin on Twitter.
I saw her tweets.
She put together. I suggest you all go and read the thread. It's powerful stuff about abuse that happened in her family home, how it was handled in school, how her friends were there for her, and how.
And by social services.
And how statements were. She was encouraged to sign statements that were to more or less silence her. I met Hazel through. We're sitting in a room with a tortoise beside us here,
yes.
and I met her a few weeks ago because she saw the tortoise online and said, I have lamps and things that actually that'll help. And I have to tell you, a wonderful person. And when I read the actual tweets, I felt sick.
Yeah.
And when I read that going around the world, I think we discussed this earlier with Izzy outside before we came in. You know, the misogyny that actually is culturally endemic. It's on the spectrum of, you know, we're not all Harvey Weinstein, but we are all certainly guilty of it, and you know, and our own preconceived notions.
It's part of all of us. I have very little time for anybody who, I was saying that to you outside, for anybody who claims that there's no misogyny in them personally, no homophobia, no transphobia, no racism, whatever. These are systemic kind of cultural things we're brought up with from our infancy, and we cannot correct it just purely through our own thought processes. We have to listen to the voices of people who have other experiences from ourselves, and we can heedlessly kind of reproduce this stuff right through our lives, or we can challenge it. There are no other options, right? There is nobody who was born free of this. There is no group that is, political tendency, anything else that is magically free.
There's no panacea and there's no utopia.
No. It's stuff you challenge, and it's, as they say, a journey, not a destination. Do you know what I mean? It's a journey that you're on for your whole life, where you're trying to be aware, and the most significant change that you can make is in yourself. Right? That's the one that you have a lot of control over. Now, in relation to stuff like MeToo, I just want to say, I saw Hazel's tweets also, and, I don't know how somebody can be so brave. I think of I think of some of the stuff that I've done on Twitter, and the kind of personal... So abuse would be too strong a word for it, but the way that people feel that they have a right to kind of poke at your stuff, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I haven't exposed anything as totally vulnerable as what Hazel has done. So, yes, this is very raw stuff. So, first of all, I want to say thank you to her and to all the others who've done this, and to offer solidarity to them. I think that's important.
I was listening. I was watching the thread as it was going up, and
me too.
as a guy, as a bloke, I don't know what to say. I'm flabbergasted when I read it. I'm shocked. I feel angry. I feel sad for her. I think of my own girls. I think how screwed up in the head do people have to be to it's their own flesh and blood, and I'm like, oh my God. So all I could possibly say, I wanted her to know that, yes, listening. You're not shouting into a void. I am listening.
Hearing you. Yeah.
And all I could say was, I have no words.
You see, that's actually the perfect response, Martin, because the focus is on the listening, yeah? Because I think if we look at a previous hashtag that explored some of this same kind of territory, the response from a lot of guys was, do you remember hashtag not all men?
Yes, I do.
Right? And which totally misses the point. There was a very good response to that, which was hashtag yes all women, because if only 5% of men were, and not all of these cases are horrific abusers, some of it is just people not thinking and not being aware of their impact on others or of the power disparity or whatever it is. Now, if that affected only 5% of men, which I don't accept, by the way, that there's an if at the beginning of that sentence, but if that affected only 5% of men, 5% of men, if each of them over the course of a lifetime imposed themselves in some way on 20 women, would be more than enough for every single woman in the world to experience sexual harassment.
Okay, yeah, I get you.
It doesn't have to be every man sexually harassing women for every woman to experience sexual harassment, right? So if your focus is on, which I think a lot of people's focus, likewise when you talk about homophobia, misogyny, whatever you talk about, there are always people who feel the need to go, but not me though. No, you're not talking, you better not be talking about me, because the whole world is about me, and if you're talking about me, you better be able to prove that I have something to do with this. When you're talking about something that's just part of the culture, right? So, you know, sexual harassment of women is a very ingrained part of the culture, and all women experience it. And I think that hashtags like MeToo, in encouraging a critical mass of women to tell their stories at the same time, do have the power to shift the culture, and that is really important. Now, I just want to say, having seen some of these previous campaigns get hold, I become a little bit concerned when individuals are named. That's a different thing from people describing the experience. You know, there is a potential for false claims. Again, that might be one false claim in 1,000, but it's a very great injustice.
I can understand.
False claim in 10,000. It's still a very great injustice.
I can
that
empathise
where it happens.
with as much as a man can possibly empathise with the women who you're up against a justice system that's stacked against you from the very start. Even if you get through the process, even you get to the end of it,
no, I completely
the sentences don't match.
I completely understand and I completely agree, but that system, flawed as it is the best we have. It allows people an opportunity to defend themselves and to be defended, and that is important for any of us. If any accusation is made against any of us, we need to have the ability to mount some kind of defence against ourselves.
Absolutely.
Against the thing that's being said.
Look, I'm
so
conscious.
That system needs to change. It's wrong.
Exactly.
Yes.
It needs to change, and there's a whole lot of stuff that needs to happen.
Well, it needs to be more victim-centred.
Of course. But in terms of naming individuals in the public arena, I kind of think that we have a pretty flawed system, but the best system that we have for dealing with allegations of that type is the criminal justice system, and that is the most appropriate way to raise those claims. I'm just concerned. I have seen previous witch hunts. I have seen people, unfortunately, manipulate these kind of claims to their own political advantage, and I have, for all that, I have a lot of solidarity with people who have experienced abuse. I think speaking about the experience of the abuse is important. Being supported in having experienced the abuse is important. But the naming of individuals and the trying to bring individuals to account, I have concern with social media being used in that way. Concerns.
Okay, and we get that, and I think we both agree on that you have to be careful.
What I'm looking at, like, okay, we can talk. Social media is not the place for. I'm conscious of using words like witch hunt, mob, lynch mob, and these things because it is. But it is not the forum for these things. No.
It's just like it can't replace. Social media is great. I love it, and I defend it when it's under attack. But it can't replace everything that journalism does.
No.
We were just talking about that, and it can't replace the criminal justice system either.
No,
social media is not the
it has opened up it has shone a light on corners of the world where things are not.
Absolutely.
You know, you have many people who scream, "Oh, I don't like those anonymous accounts," and you're saying, "Well, you try living in under an Iranian regime where you need to be anonymous
exactly.
account." You know, we've all, you know, so it's given a voice to the voiceless. It's given lights to some of the dark corners.
The most important thing is us finding each other. You know, I mean, the three of us are sitting here now. We've found each other through social media. A lot of my life consists of people that I have very real relationships with that I have met through social media. An awful lot of protest movements and so on are organised through social media now, and that is, of course, another reason why the politicians want to do away with it.
It's where we first met each other, was at a protest. It's where I met Dara.
Yes.
You know, it's where we miss good protests probably at the present moment in time. It's not that we don't have issues. We have issues coming out the roof, but we don't have a popular movement on the move at the moment. Now, I know...
Well, hang on. There's a right to change.
I was just going to mention this, and our last week's guest, Erica, who was on with us, she's going to be speaking on Saturday at this Right to Change. And Erica was talking to me yesterday evening, and she was saying to me how livid she was with what was going on RTE primetime last night. I think we'll take a break for 2 minutes and we'll come back to it.
We'll come back to that.
It's not prime time.
Right, Martin, I'm going to come back in and just talk about some of the small boilers that are really, you know, prevalent at the moment. And one was that caught my eyes again, the great fella at Tup Ed, Simon McGarr, where he pointed out that the PSC card, based on what Adrian Weckler was saying, is as it was called, a creeping national ID card, to be required for paying your taxes online and maybe even for voter registration. Simon pointed out that this is actually this is under investigation by the Data Protection Commissioner to whether it's even legal at this stage, and yet they're actually giving it more credence. This is something that's going to get bigger and worse because people don't understand that in this country, your data it's actually been transferred between private companies and public companies that have contracts with the state.
And wasn't there a recent prosecution of somebody who was working in social welfare who was selling
sold data? That's right.
Selling data in relation to insurance claims, I think.
And you've got to remember, so
it's wide open to abuse. I think the real problem with it, there's been no debate prior to the introduction of the card, right? I think, you know, I mean, it may be that we need a more sophisticated... It may be that we need a national ID card. It may be that that is the decision for security reasons, whatever. But when you have a debate before it, you know exactly what data is collected on the card, who will have access to it, the potential pitfalls are discussed.
Well,
none of that has happened. Nobody is very clear, really. I mean, my mother is in her 80s. Very shortly after the death of my dad, when she was still in serious grief, she had to go in for this humiliating interview that people have to do to get the PSC and sit and it's a disgraceful way, really.
Well,
to treat people
this
who've worked
argument
all their life. And there was a woman who wasn't paid her pension. Now
That's
they've paid her. Now they've paid her because
I wrote to Data Protection because I applied for provisional license for a motorbike, and I was told the only ID that was acceptable was the PSC card. So I've written twice to Data Protection wanting to know where's the legal justification for this. Now, I have had dealings with Data Protection going back 20 years, and I can say, hand on heart, Data Protection isn't worth that. It is a useless, utterly useless organisation within Ireland. All data leaks, eventually, all data leaks. And if you look at
You're talking about the Data Protection Commissioner.
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
he's
the
bloody
concept
useless.
of data protection is very important. You know, there's all kinds of things that are very important that they have to have teeth. You know, we
they actually
briefly mentioned RTE investigates. Yes, but one of the problems in relation to the RTE investigates last night, you know, there is an inspection procedure there for private rented accommodation.
But 5% were inspected.
Yeah, 5% were inspected, and in 4 counties there was 100% failure rate.
Yeah.
And in many others they were well up into the 90s. This is a ludicrous inspection regime. You know, you might as well save the money and not have that
But
inspection
Well,
regime.
I looked at that program last night and I thought to myself, over 10 years ago, I went and I spoke to I went to the corporate enforcer's office, met with a barrister in there, sat down and told them about a web of companies that were renting out derelict fire trap buildings
Yes.
around Dublin. I spent well over an hour. I gave them loads of documentation and I said, what are you going to do now? And it was, we'll be back to you. Well, now I'd like to ask what's going to happen. This is over 10 years ago, and now there's going to be no corporate
Well, there was
enforcement
one-
anymore.
A friend of mine was living somewhere very similar to the premises that was shown in Crumlin last night 10 years ago. That is how long this situation is going on. So, you know, it's something that was ostensibly a commercial premises.
That's right.
It's one of the things, actually, we mentioned the water struggle previously. Part of my feeling about water, I mean, water is a public good, and you know, it's something that needs to be available to people, whether they can afford it or not. It needs to be safeguarded. It's essential to life. In the end of the day, that was very important. I'm very proud to have been part of that struggle, and that struggle is, God knows, not over. It's only beginning. But do you think that kind of slumlord that we saw evidence of last night, do you think that kind of slumlord is going to give a damn whether people in that building have water or not?
Oh, no,
or
no,
a
no,
flushing
no, no.
toilet?
I mean, I can say this because I spent a long time investigating this. This is not unknown to the civil service. This is not unknown to the government. They know this is going on. I mean, I gave them connections between webs of companies and these places that are being, these fire traps that are being let go. Nothing ever happened. Nobody ever came back to me. I was very disappointed after going into the corporate enforcer's office that a barrister sat there, listened to everything I had to say, and then nothing, absolutely nothing afterwards. A complete waste of my time. I had spent maybe 2-3 years investigating,
Sure.
and nobody picked up on it.
I'm sorry,
Nobody was going
we've
to do
swerved
anything.
away from PSC.
No, not at all.
right,
I'm conscious of the fact that like what the common thread between all of this is accountability. We can the data protection commissioner has powers of enforcement. They can take you off your right to hold customers' data. They can fine you a couple of 100,000. They can suspend you for 6 years, I think, and they can do it. They don't.
They
No,
don't.
they don't.
We had Alan Shatter get told, bold Alan Shatter, for going on and divulging Mick Wallace's details on the national airwaves. Where
This
was
is a bit like the banks getting, was it reprimanded? Was that
admonished?
Admonished.
It's accountability is the thread that goes through the whole.
Admonish the hell out of them.
Yeah.
What good does that do? Yeah.
Well, when you've dealt with data protection in any way or over a long period of time, you will find that all they keep doing is batting it back to you. It's this paper exercise. This is what they say. Now, what do you say? This is
But
what
Martin,
they say.
Can I? There's a new act coming in, and it's EU wide. And like I said this last week, and I'm saying it again. When it came to the insurance cartel-like practices, it was the EU Commission that actually helped in Ireland. When it came to Apple and our most transparent tax haven in the world, it was the EU Commission. And likewise now there's an EU data protection starting off from, I think, from December.
That's right.
Early next year.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Brexiteers, I think, I can't remember who exactly used the phrase, but part of the justification from a big money point of view for Brexit was what they wanted was a bonfire of regulations.
Yes.
Yeah. A bonfire of regulations, you know, unfortunately, I would have major issues with the EU, but most reform in Ireland has been driven by the EU
Exactly.
in my lifetime.
Yep.
And it has been piecemeal and improperly implemented, but
It goes back to what we said about
has given us some tools.
Lorraine Higgins saying we need to do this about social media. No, Senator, there's actually hate speech laws there that if they are used, you can enforce them. It's accountability.
Well, this brings me on to my
Well, they
boiler.
always talk. We've mentioned Regina Doherty earlier as well. You know, when we mentioned the public service card, I really think that the phrase mandatory but not compulsory will follow that woman for life, and I hope it does, really, because I mean it really is just a classic
verbal trick,
political doublespeak. But likewise, Regina Doherty is another one who has talked about death threats, right? Anytime politicians are getting a little bit of heat online, they start to talk about these death threats.
I know you've had death threats, Izzy.
Yeah, sure. You know, I mean, I nobody should have death threats. And threatening somebody is already very illegal. Okay? And, you know, the thing happened last week with Ming.
Ming versus INM.
Yeah, Ming versus INM, or whatever way you want to say it. But the guy got...
Niall O'Connor got death threats.
Niall O'Connor, we are told, got death threats, and the person who made those death threats has been identified. The account holder of the phone has been identified. An investigation in a matter of days, and yet we've been hearing all these stories from politicians for years.
Alan Kelly.
Actually, was it? Did Ian O'Doherty do the story about Regina Doherty's death threats? Oh no, it wasn't. It was Matt Cooper. That was what I got blocked by Matt Cooper for.
I remember that day.
Because I actually asked Matt Cooper, you know, have you seen substantiation of the existence of these threats? Which I think, before a story is thrown out, you know, if I went to independent news and media and said I'm getting death threats online, they're going to say, have you brought them to the police?
There's a flip side to that coin. I said during the week, after last week's show, myself and Tony, we got quite a bit of traffic from those who felt offended by our defence of Ibrahim Halawi. And I won't mention the name. One chap in particular was going on about snowflake generation, blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, I'm not into censorship. I generally punch Nazis. Now, it was, you know, we know the history of punch Nazis. It's a very long history. But then that was retweeted in the Irish Times because this guy claims that I was making a threat, the Sunday Times, making a threat against him. And I said,
only if you identifies as a Nazi.
Only if you identify as a Nazi. Only if you identify as a Nazi.
Absolutely.
Anyway, this leads me into my boiler for the week. And my boiler for the week, it was same as last week. Philip Boucher-Hayes is doing gargantuan work on bogus self-employment. Last Tuesday, he spoke about bogus self-employment in RTE, and it's literally gone under the radar. Philip blew a whistle 10 feet long. He pointed it out. At the same time, we get this review of the wage disparity, the gender wage disparity within RTE that was done by Kevin Mulvey. But it didn't include people who were self-employed. Complete scamp, complete smokescreen.
Well,
that brings us to Leo's tweet yesterday, doesn't it? Have you got that somewhere?
Oh, the tweet of that employment is down to unemployment is down to 6%. Its lowest level.
I think it's 8%.
Leo said 6.
Yes,
8% from 15.
And he said that when Fine Gael took over, it was at 15. And let's never go back was his comment.
Yeah.
And more importantly,
somebody commented on that that it absolutely looked like a Trump tweet. If you put the last sentence, "Let's never go back," into capitals, and put Donald Trump's picture on it, you know,
sad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's it's the spin unit and the spin. Oh, I think it's great.
I want to link this into RTE Investigates, right?
Yeah.
Because and the work that you're doing, Martin, because the thing is, this is a completely bogus statistic, yeah? The new employment that has been created is bogus self-employment,
Low paid work,
schemes of one sort or another, with an element of compulsion introduced to force unemployed people to take schemes that may well be inappropriate for them. and we now have a vast number of working poor in this country. And when you look at RTE Investigates last night, those people that you are seeing stacked up like sardines in a tin are working poor, right? They are people who are working in low-wage employment to pay to sleep 10 in a row.
And they're the
That
lucky
is
ones.
Fine
They're
Gael's
the lucky
achievement.
ones.
Well, yes and no, because as it happens, and I mean, obviously this confidentiality stuff, I'm not going to talk about my work in any kind of detail, but I work with homeless people, and the conditions that those people are living in are worse than the conditions in homeless accommodation, or in the homeless accommodation that I've seen. So, you know, the reality at this point, we have thousands of people in homeless accommodation, right? Thousands all over the country now. And the way we count our homeless figures, we're underestimating the number of homeless. We're only really counting those that are accessing homeless services.
Yes.
Right? But that number still runs into thousands at this point, yeah?
8,300.
Yeah, 8,300. We have at least that number again, I would imagine, who are living in the kind of inadequate accommodation.
But we are being told, and
that we saw last night. We have people who are living in cars. We have people who are living in. Last Christmas, I heard there was a trench in one suburban Dublin park, a trench with sheets of plywood over the top of it that people were living in. A substantial number of people. People are living in tents.
There's a
in
tent
their
village along
relatives'
the canal.
back gardens. There's a tent village on the canal. This is what Fine Gael and the previous Fine Gael Labour coalition have presided over, and we also have to give honourable mention to Fianna Fáil for creating the conditions in which this happened. There is no social housing being built.
Can I get in on
You
that?
can.
On the social housing thing, that Mel Reynolds wrote yesterday in Village magazine, and the likes of Mel Reynolds and Lorcan Sir, the guys that are doing all excellent work on this and exposing the fraud that is the Department of Housing statistics. 72 houses were built, social local authority houses were built in the first 6 months of this year. 72. This is Simon Coveney. This is Owen Murphy. This is they've delivered more plans than houses at this stage.
Yes.
Between summits, plans, proposals.
Well, last night now when this programme was on, I didn't have a whole lot to say because this is not news to me that this is going on. No. I have seen it for years going on.
Yes.
But I also said, don't express your shock if you're going to vote Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. If you're saying, oh, this is terrible, and then you go out and vote Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael again, you are the problem.
Well, it's turkeys voting for Christmas.
You are the problem. You can have social housing, but you can't have social housing with Fine Gael and with Fianna Fáil. It's never going to happen.
But can I go back to the real reason why that's the case, Martin? Because there's a large constituency of voters and people with money in, you know, with mortgages and things, and we benefit from this. We feel better off because property prices are back up at Celtic Tiger levels.
Well, you see, this is the thing. This is not a crisis. This is a deliberate policy.
Yes.
When the economy collapsed, there was enormous effort went into protecting property prices, far greater than went into protecting people. Now, that I mean, it was a deliberate decision that was made. The key to this problem is empty housing stock. There are 230,000 empty houses in Ireland, right? Now, even if we say that there are 10,000 homeless people and 30,000 people in inadequate accommodation, there are more than enough houses there if those houses were available. I don't know what percentage, but quite a high proportion of them have been bought up by foreign vulture funds, who in some cases have found, and some big indigenous landlords also have found, that in some cases it actually makes more economic sense for them to close down
That's right.
properties, reduce their overheads on them, and contribute to a shortage of supply, which keeps the rent in their other properties high.
No, this is systemic. Actually, it's there's blocks.
This goes back to Nama.
It goes back to Nama. Look, you only have to go up the road.
It goes back a lot further.
You only have to go up the road to Tyrrellstown to all of the people who found out that the street was bought by a vulture fund who said, "Oh, by the way, you're all going out," and it's better off for them to drive up the rental prices. They can afford to sit on this.
But you see, then we get splashed over the papers during the week that even though we were told that the Rugby World Cup, I mean, they were basically laughed at and said, "You're having a laugh if you think you're going to bring it over here." And this brings me to the World Cup, or the Rugby World Cup, where Leo was sitting there in his nice green tie with the Rugger Buggers. And even though they've been laughed at and said, "Look, you don't have the facilities to host a World Cup in rugby," he's saying, "We're going to keep going at this. We're going to throw more money at it." Now, he gave up on health. He gave up on homelessness. He's given up on quality jobs. But rugby, when you have absolutely no chance of getting it, we'll throw everything at that. I mean, priorities up their arses in this government.
Martin, the tortoise doesn't like you getting this agitated. He's trying to dig a hole out of the road, really.
I just think our priorities are not my priorities, but my priority is I'd like to not bring my children down the street and step over homeless people.
Yeah.
I think that's a better priority than having people running around, waving flags for rugby.
Well,
Can I bring it to Twitter for a minute? Because there was a brilliant, I think it was Kieran Cunningham, journalist, had a great tweet where he said, thoughts and prayers at this dark moment with Ewan McKenna, who's just lost out on 6 years worth of articles decrying Ireland for getting the Rugby World Cup, and Ewan kicking back on the basis of woke up to the best news ever that we didn't get the Rugby World Cup. Absolutely delighted. And I kind of sit with Ewan on this. I wouldn't have minded, obviously, to see the Rugby World Cup here, but I have to say, statistically, we would have been 200 million down for potentially white elephants around the country.
Well, no, it's not a white elephant. It is, as I described it on Twitter, I said it's just more show pony stuff. That's what this is.
That's the thing. This is a public relations regime that we're living under at the moment, right? It's like Leo's comment about falling unemployment that isn't falling at all. Well, it is. People are essentially working for a subsistence level. People are unable to, as I said, I work in homeless accommodation. There are now a lot of people who are in homeless accommodation who are working. They're working and they can't put a roof over their heads. There are a lot of people stacked up like sardines in these illegal hostels, private rented arrangements, whatever you want to call them. They are working.
And we have a Taoiseach who has a unit that is charged with making sure that this put the most positive spin on these things.
The most positive spin on
Well,
things.
I'm
Wasn't there a story during the week as well with him didn't Jean Kerrigan have something last week about Leo scotching stories coming from sources close to the government?
Yeah, well, this is an old favourite of mine where we say a source close to, or an unverified, well-positioned source, or a well-placed source, and you're using this now.
These people are in the public employ. Jean Kerrigan is absolutely right. If these people are being paid to put out propaganda on behalf of the state,
we need to know
who said that, and be able to go back to them and see accountability.
And what was very serious about the one that Jean pointed out was that they actually were interfering in Stormont. What they were trying to get an actual deal to get an executive up and working. And Leo decided to go with an unverified and unnamed source, just saying well placed, and then saying, well, I'm not going to be accountable to you.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if you look at Leo's Twitter account, and it was pointed out to me during the week, he gets a lot of favourites from locked accounts. Mm-hmm. And that makes you suspect that these are bot accounts that have locked so that they can't be shown to be bot accounts. So he's increasing his footstep. It's all scam.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And the secret RTE producer tweeted, I think it was yesterday, that the RTE 2FM
I
account
saw that.
has, you know, hundreds of thousands of followers
accounts.
and never gets any likes.
Yes.
And no, it's systemic. That you go
But
for.
they're using our money to buy fake Twitter accounts.
It's systemic.
When Enda was in power, Enda used to have quite a lot of bots tweeting him, and I used to go back and check where all these bots were coming from, and they were coming from Mexico. And I'm like, why are this woman in with her boobs hanging out in lingerie? That's her picture. Why is she retweeting Enda Kenny? And you go back into it and you look, and it's 2 tweets.
Yeah.
This is just a bot. It sits there. It retweets Enda Kenny, and that's all it's there
Yeah,
for.
he's very popular in Mexico.
He's a big one for tequila. It's really now. Like we bring in back. Like I have to go to this now. We've talked Rugby World Cup. Now we have Leo with his own biography coming out.
Oh,
we have a Leo.
oh God! You're going to love this, Izzy. This is this new book that's coming out called Leo. And the title is Leo Varadkar, A Very Modern Taoiseach. Now, it's written by Philip Bryan and Niall O'Connor. And it says, the inside story of how the son of an Indian immigrant battled against adversity with his own sexuality to become the youngest and first openly gay Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland. Now, I'm sure, Izzy...
Battled against adversity with his own sexuality.
Absolutely. Now, I'm sure you owe Leo a debt of gratitude for the ground he broke for you.
Yeah, I think people really underestimate the historic importance of Leo Varadkar, who is, after all, the first Taoiseach named after a sign of the zodiac. I think in time to come, when, you know, Sagittarius O'Shea, a great grandniece of Dahi O'Shea.
What about Gemini Groves? It has a ring
Well,
to it.
I mean, son of an immigrant. My great-grandfather is English, so I'm my great-grandfather's English, so I'm the son of an English immigrant.
You know, the thing is that, of course, there is discrimination against immigrants in this country,
Clearly.
and discrimination against people of Asian origin and so on. So I am not going to be the one to say that there has been no adversity in Mr. Varadkar's life, right? That's not where I'm going from. But, you know, money is a great insulator.
Yes.
Yeah, and really, you know, Leo Varadkar's biography, well, it's hardly going to be a page turner, is it?
Well,
you kind of feel like, okay, surprise, surprise, rich boy makes good.
Yes,
I think
son of doctor does quite well.
Winston Churchill wrote it years ago when he said, success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And Leo was enthusiastic to the end, you know.
Yes,
Well,
he's certainly enthusiastic. I think in relation, you know, there's no doubt that he's been completely opportunistic in relation to LGBT politics. You know, I'm sorry, but I can't give them any respect on that ground. You know, this is a man who was arguing, you know, fairly passionately against gay people having parenting rights.
Only recently.
In very recent years, and you know, he waited until well into the marriage referendum campaign, like seriously, you know, when the campaign was pretty much fought, and he took his moment, and you know, I can't see him as somebody who has been any great ally to the LGBT community in general, you know.
I think the only title for a book about Leo, and you know, maybe in years to come when he's just a distant memory, I'll write it myself, and it's called The Show Pony.
Yeah.
Leo is all about image. There is no real substance there. There isn't even really a belief system behind him. It's whatever soundbite works at that time. His achievement was becoming Taoiseach, not what he's going to do as Taoiseach.
Yes, he's more polished than some of our previous
Taoiseach. I think he's polished by media. I think he was polished from the very beginning by
you've
media.
got to give him some credit. He started preparing to be Taoiseach several years ago by telling people, I've no interest in being Taoiseach, while having his own website, his Twitter handle, campaign for Leo, his actual website ready to go before there was ever a campaign to start with. he has planned this. Now, if only he put the same planning into his actual day job, we may actually see some results.
To bring it back to the book.
Sadly, image works.
Yes.
You know, sadly, we are living in an age when a particularly unattractive reality TV star is able to become the president of the United States.
Yeah.
You know, people will buy into all kinds of stuff. A relatively small proportion of people, you know, I mean, Leo hasn't had to have any substantial number of people vote for him. You know,
No.
I mean, even the leadership was handed to him essentially.
Well, he didn't win the popular vote. He won the
the
party.
parliamentary party vote, and that is basically people who reckon that image-wise, they reckon Leo is a marketing tool. Just
He is.
You know,
He is the marketing. He is the acceptable face of Fine Gael, because most of the time their faces are completely unacceptable.
Yeah, but in the end of the day, these people are going to be judged on how they performed on things like housing, health, which you know, Leo Varadkar was in charge of,
said he had unfinished business in, and still hasn't yet got round to having a look at it.
I mean, I hope that is how they will be judged. But you know, something that we must talk about another day is political apathy, because all of these moves to the right in elections worldwide are fueled by a lack of voter engagement for understandable reasons.
Well, voters are turned off.
Most of the political parties have given up on trying to represent what we might call ordinary people. For want of a better word.
Always say
so they represent they represent the money.
75 grand plus. If you're earning 75 grand plus, you're a fool if you don't vote for Fine Gael.
Yeah, but if only 50% of the electorate vote, which is becoming the pattern internationally, if you look at all of the kind of contentious votes of recent times, there are turnouts of approximately 50%. And then, you know, kind of half of that, 51, you know, Brexit was like 51% or something.
All you need is 24% of that base, and you've actually
Donald Trump was 49%, whatever.
Exactly.
So you know, we have serious problems in this country. There is no credible left-wing alternative.
Exactly. Where's our Corbyn? Where's our Sanders?
I'm the Corbyn, you're the Sanders. There you go. That's it. We've wrapped it up. We've just decided.
Well, he's Colonel Sanders.
I'm more herbs and spices anyway.
Maybe. But yeah, that is our problem, and as long as that situation continues, they only need 20-25% of the
and that's actually been made abundantly clear by the fact that both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have actually been comfortable enough to say we're not going to do a deal with Sinn Féin, which means we won't represent that demographic at all. So we'll run in an election on the basis to be the government for all the country, but only represent the 25% of the country. Yeah. And that's where we are, folks. And the people don't wake up to that.
They don't even represent the 25%. I mean, there's there's probably 10% of the country who does very well out of Fine Gael's policies, for example, yeah? So those 10% will vote for them, and then, you know, they'll pick up another 15% of people who, you know,
aspirationalists
are aspirational.
Social climate.
Think it's going to benefit them at some time in the future, but it really isn't benefiting them at all. So somebody needs to make a pitch to those people as well. Yeah.
Well, now I think we're going to bring it home on that now at this.
I'd like to say thanks, Izzy. Thanks for coming on, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for leaving the axe at the door. Izzy put up this GIF. I very bravely put up on Twitter that I am not scared of Izzy, and now that I'm sitting here at her feet, I can say
he is actually sitting at my feet.
I am sitting at Izzy's feet.
This hyperbole.
There's a pecking order in here, and I am on the lowest.
Is higher.
I'm very happy you came on, Izzy. We're delighted. We want voices that aren't the general little cozy consensus that's out there.
I'm glad you asked me. I'd love to do it again sometime. I was really pleased you had Erica last week as well. You know, I think Erica is a very important voice that needs to be heard. You're doing a great job. I'm really pleased that
flattery will get you everywhere.
Yeah, you'll be asked back.
Well, I want to say I'm sorry. You know, I'm aware that you got certain amount of flack about
we don't
asking me
care.
as well. I know you don't care. I think anybody who expresses strong opinions, this is a conversation we should have another time. We were having it downstairs earlier on. Twitter is great and has given me a lot in my life, but it's very easy for people to lose a sense of proportion on Twitter, and I've had many disputes on Twitter. At one stage, the pro-lifers were on my tail, the homophobes have been on my tail, then it was the wonderful Irish Labour Party who wanted to have me run out of town. And currently, or most recently I should say, rather than currently, because this is fading too with time, it's a bunch of people who have got it into their heads that a bunch of feminists writing a letter disagreeing with an Irish Times article is somehow a war crime, which is a classic example of people just kind of losing the sense of proportion, right? I want to pay tribute to you guys for engaging with people who have all kinds of different opinions, right? I think it's really important in this community that we're trying to build, without any assistance from the powers that be, our government, etc., that we embody those kind of ideals to a certain extent. So, it's okay if a bunch of people disagree with you and write a letter, right? That is in no way equivalent to somebody burning a cross on your lawn, right? Now, when I see an analogy like that being drawn, that's when you know that this person has not suffered this kind of bigotry in their life. That's where you see privilege in action, right? I am fortunate. I have never faced the risk of being lynched, right? But I have, for 10 years, I could not walk out my front door without being jeered at, pursued through the streets, spat at, having my windows broken, coming back to vandalism on my home, for homophobic reasons, okay? So that is, that is obviously not so severe that I feared losing my life, but you could draw a fair analogy between that and the activities of the KKK
I think you can, yes.
That's bigotry. That is what actual bigotry is like. It's not a bunch of people writing a letter saying they disagree with you, If people have a different opinion and they get together and express that opinion, that's just more free speech. That's not trying to shut somebody else up. That's just more free speech. And there's a lot of nonsense come into the free speech debate with, the Nazis are all over free speech at the moment, and it's all about their free speech.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There'll be no free speech for anybody when they get their way. If somebody...
I'm all for free speech once you agree with me.
Exactly. But you say what you want to say, and other people disagree with it, quite possibly protest about it. That is more free speech. You can then protest about what they say. That is more free speech. Let's not lose the plot, folks, yeah? Let's remember, this is all speech, and speech is powerful.
Well, even absolutely, and can I just say, I'm thrilled you came on. I'm aware of the flack, and I have to tell you, it doesn't cause me any I don't lose any sleep over it.
No.
I do think that even some of the other parties in both of this, you know what, guys, the microphone's going to be open to people, and that's just the way it is, because we're here to open up this to a diversity of voices, a diversity of opinions. It's a small little startup, myself and Martin.
The other side of that is we have to take a bit of responsibility for our own position as well. Like, I'm not, I'm aware that stuff is going on. There's people that, are having a go at me or whatever. But I take responsibility for that, in that I've stepped back a bit from Twitter to let that cool down. Do you know what I mean? I've actually been on Twitter very little. If you were to count my tweets, which some people are doing, you would find that since July, I've been on much less. But I've just been taking a bit of a breather, and my garden is looking much better for it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So sometimes if it is getting a bit much, we need to be prepared to stand away from it ourselves, rather than going on the warpath about abuse and ending up sounding like Lorraine Higgins or Regina Doherty.
Yes.
Do you know, if you can't stand the heat, the option of getting out of the kitchen does exist.
Well, all you've got to do is turn off the laptop.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, turn off the laptop.
Yeah.
On
Okay.
that, I'd like to say that we're doing quite well. I think we're well up over the 2,000 now, Tony, and there's some blog awards coming up, and this is really important. I would like you all to vote for us on the Blog Awards 2017.
I'm pretty sure it's not a blog award. It's probably a podcast
Sorry,
award.
podcast award. Look, I'm asleep already.
Start again.
A pod award, the 2017 pod award. I'll put a link up on the Twitter feed. Get in there, vote for us. Say you want to hear different voices. Say you're fed up of hearing all the same voices over and over again. Anything you'd like to add, Tony?
No, I think Martin is insane to say 4 weeks in that we should be going for a nomination for something. But you know what? He was insane when we started.
Listen, guys,
4 weeks ago.
You've made a great. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you've made a great start in 4 weeks, right? You've made a great impact, and long may it continue.
Thanks very much for listening, guys. The show is all about the listeners. Hit us up on Twitter. Send us an email to theechochamberpod@gmail.com. iTunes is live, so you can. The link is on the Twitter account. Subscribe on iTunes. Subscribe on SoundCloud. And again, you know what? If anybody else, Martin keeps his DMs open. If anybody wants to slide in and grab the microphone.
Oh yeah. Anybody who's interested in coming on, send us a DM. We'll put it on the list. We have some nice guests lined up going into the future. We'll let you know as we go along. And we have alternative views, some very alternative views. Looking forward to hearing them.
Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.
And thank you.